In 2015, world leaders gathered under the flag of the United Nations to commit to a plan that would shape the direction of the planet until 2030. Called Agenda 2030, the plan was presented as a compass for a fairer, more sustainable and balanced world. Its goals are ambitious: eradication of poverty, gender equality, clean energy, quality education. On paper, it is a manifesto of hope. But behind the beautiful words and inspiring speeches, gaps, hidden connections, and concentrated interests are beginning to emerge, ones that many prefer to ignore. The almost unanimous adherence to the project, its convergence with the World Economic Forum, and the growing economic and social changes around the world fuel the suspicion that this global plan may not be as neutral as it seems. The phrase, "you will own nothing and be happy," although presented as a vision of a more efficient and sustainable future, echoes as a dark warning about the loss of individual autonomy. In a world where data, resources, and even property are increasingly in the hands of a few, the remaining question is, what is really behind Agenda 2030? Welcome to another night where the mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference so that YouTube can deliver these videos to more people, and so I can keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's go to the video. When you hear about Agenda 2030, you probably imagine something positive: environment, equality, education, sustainability. And that's exactly how it's presented by the UN. But the truth is, the more you study the actual content behind these global goals, the more you begin to realize that there is a huge gap between the official narrative and what's really happening behind the scenes. The plan was launched in 2015, with support from virtually every country in the world. It consists of 17 goals with proposals that, at first glance, seem harmless. But what almost no one knows is that these goals were not created in an open or democratic way. On the contrary, much of the guidelines came from private foundations, large corporations, and financial institutions. None of these entities were elected. Even so, they are shaping what they call the future of humanity. Instead of public debates or direct consultations with the population, most of the decisions about the agenda's content were made in closed meetings with representatives of the global elite. Forums in Geneva, Davos, and New York decided what would be the standard for the entire world, far from the reach of traditional media and with no public oversight. And why does this matter? Because decisions of this magnitude should be born from the people, not from closed rooms where only billionaires and diplomats circulate. Meanwhile, the UN document is being gradually implemented by governments around the world, and all under the label of sustainable development. It sounds harmless, but that's where the trap lies. The words are carefully chosen to avoid resistance. Terms like economic resilience, climate equity, or social justice are appealing but vague. They hide the real impact of certain measures that are changing the social, political, and economic structures of many countries. A good example is the push for total digitization. The agenda advocates for the use of technology to make everything more efficient and inclusive. But what happens when access to basic services depends on a digital wallet controlled by banks or governments? And when your personal carbon score starts to limit what you can buy or consume? What is sold as innovation may very well be the first step toward a permanent surveillance system. These changes are being adopted through public policies, without most people having any idea that they are part of a larger plan. And what's most intriguing is how the global financial system has begun to use Agenda 2030 as an approval criterion. Countries seeking loans from the IMF or World Bank, for example, must show alignment with the plan's objectives. In other words, adhering to the agenda is no longer a choice. It has become a disguised requirement. The question remains, who really benefits from all this? When you start following the money and the names behind the structure, you find the same familiar faces. The World Economic Forum, for example, does not hide that it is aligned with the agenda's principles. They openly talk about reimagining capitalism and building a stakeholder capitalism. But who are these stakeholders? Because so far, it only seems like the owners of capital are at the table. And this is where that phrase that became a meme, but never completely disappeared, comes in. You will own nothing and be happy. This idea wasn't made up. It was promoted by the World Economic Forum itself in an official video. The proposal? A future where you rent everything you use, from your house to your car, and everything is digitally connected. The justification is ecological, but in the end, you lose the right to own. And who controls what you use? That's never made clear. And it doesn't stop there. The narrative the UN has built is that Agenda 2030 is just a guide, not mandatory. But in practice, we see laws being adapted, credit systems being shaped, and even children's education being altered to align with new global values. It no longer seems like just a set of goals. It feels like a new world constitution. A constitution written by invisible hands. All of this is being sold as progress. But when you put the pieces together and look at the bigger picture, you start to see something darker. What happens when all nations follow a single plan? And this plan was developed by a small group that no one chose? Can we still talk about national sovereignty? Or are we slowly entering a new kind of silent global rule? If there's one name that constantly comes up when talking about global decisions, it's the World Economic Forum. And as technical or even irrelevant as the name may seem to those outside the circles of power, what happens there directly or indirectly influences the lives of virtually everyone. The forum is famous for its meetings in Davos, Switzerland, where heads of state, CEOs of major corporations, billionaire foundations, and selected intellectuals gather to think about the future. But what exactly are they planning? Their most recent motto is straightforward: Great Reset. The idea was officially launched in 2020, at the height of the pandemic. According to the organizers, the global crisis offered a unique opportunity to rebuild the world in a more sustainable and equitable way. But this optimistic discourse hides a centralized control structure that is gradually taking shape. They're not just proposing economic changes. They talk about a complete reform: how we work, consume, relate, and even how we behave. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the forum, is the face behind this movement. In his books and speeches, he advocates for the fusion of public and private spheres, where governments and companies work together to govern. But this shared governance raises an obvious question. If corporations are helping to write the rules, who ensures those rules will benefit the average citizen? Who oversees these agreements when all participants belong to the same economic elite? The forum presents itself as just a space for ideas, but in practice, its proposals become public policies in many countries. The very concept of stakeholder capitalism, promoted by Schwab, is already being adopted by companies and governments as a management model. In this system, profit ceases to be the sole goal and is replaced by a commitment to social values. Sounds noble, but who defines those values? Who decides what the priorities are? Again, it's not the people. The connection between the World Economic Forum and Agenda 2030 is not a theory, it's official. In 2019, the WEF and the UN signed a Memorandum of Understanding to work together on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. In other words, the same organization that talks about redefining capitalism is helping to shape the plan that governments are following in the name of sustainability. And all of this without most of the population even knowing such an agreement exists. And how does this manifest in everyday life? A clear example is the digitalization of the economy. The forum advocates for the elimination of physical money, the use of digital currencies issued by central banks, and the creation of universal digital identities, all under the justification of fighting fraud, increasing transparency, and facilitating transactions. But have you ever stopped to think what happens when your financial life depends entirely on monitored systems? Whoever has the power to shut down that system also has the power to disconnect you from it. In addition, the forum has been promoting a series of programs for training global leaders, young politicians, entrepreneurs, activists. They call this Young Global Leaders. Many well-known names today, like Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, and Jacinda Ardern, went through this program. Coincidence or not, all of them implemented policies aligned with the forum's ideals. So the question that arises is, are these leaders governing for their people or for a larger project that no one voted for? The WEF's proposals also reach the world through reports, recommendations, and future scenarios that shape public discourse. When we hear politicians talking about the new green economy or the redefinition of consumption, rest assured, much of that vocabulary came directly from documents produced by this group. It's a standardized language that crosses borders and becomes common sense, even if few understand its true meaning. And we can't ignore the role of technology in this equation. The forum promotes what it calls the Fourth Industrial Revolution, based on artificial intelligence, automation, and the fusion of biology and machines. This includes everything from real-time health monitoring to the implementation of chips for data storage. The promise is efficiency, but the possibility of total control becomes real when these technologies are used to monitor habits, behaviors, and individual decisions. With all this laid out, it becomes hard not to ask, is the World Economic Forum just a discussion space or the command room of the new global model? When private institutions take over global decision-making and their leaders openly talk about changing the way we live, are we still waiting for it to happen? Or have we simply not noticed that it already is? In recent years, the entire world has felt the effects of an economic crisis that seems relentless. Soaring inflation, collapsing supply chains, small businesses shutting down, and constant pressure for economies to reinvent themselves. What many see as the consequence of unpredictable events, such as the pandemic and geopolitical conflicts, may in fact be part of an intentional redesign of the global economic order. Let's look at the signs. Since 2020, dozens of countries have begun injecting trillions of dollars in stimulus packages to keep their economies running. But that money didn't come without a price. Public debt skyrocketed. At the same time, we saw an unprecedented growth in money printing, which quickly led to inflation, and in some places, hyperinflation. This wasn't just a desperate reaction. It was a global movement, coordinated by central banks and financial institutions with worldwide reach. And where has all of this taken us? To the weakening of traditional currency, increased dependence on credit, and the loss of autonomy for small and medium-sized businesses. Large global conglomerates were the only ones to survive comfortably. Meanwhile, the average citizen became dependent on government aid, digital benefits, and temporary subsidies. Little by little, a new kind of dependency began to form, more subtle, but even more dangerous. The question here isn't whether there was a crisis. The question is, who profited from it? While millions lost their jobs and homes, big tech, logistics, and data companies posted record-breaking profits. The same companies that now offer the digital solutions for the new normal. And many of them, it's worth noting, are active partners of the World Economic Forum and the UN, directly involved in Agenda 2030 projects. Another rarely discussed point is how supply chains were reorganized. The crisis was used as a justification to shorten routes, reduce the number of suppliers, and concentrate production in digital and automated hubs. In practice, this means less product diversity, less competition, and greater centralized control over what reaches the shelves. And who controls these chains now? The same giants who helped design the new consumption model. The next step is being called the energy transition and the green economy. The narrative is clear. We need to abandon fossil fuels and invest in clean energy. No one disagrees with the importance of caring for the planet, but the speed at which this is being imposed is destroying entire sectors of the economy. Farmers are being pressured to change millennia-old techniques. Transport companies are facing extremely high taxes, and cities are being forced to adapt their entire infrastructure in just a few years. Who sets this pace? Behind this green rush, there are trillions of dollars at stake, and massive investment funds ready to pour money into anyone aligned with ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria. These criteria are, interestingly, based on the principles of Agenda 2030. In other words, funding only goes to those who follow the system's guidelines, and those who don't adapt. They're left out of the game, no credit, no market, no chance. Economic digitalization is also advancing at a surprising speed. Central banks in various countries are already testing official digital currencies, known as CBDCs. They promise more security and convenience, but also allow total tracking of every transaction. Imagine a world where all your money is digital, your spending behavior is monitored, and your access to financial services can be restricted based on social or environmental criteria. It sounds like science fiction, but it's being built right now. Meanwhile, traditional media normalizes this new reality. Crises are treated as inevitable. The blame is always on external factors, but rarely is it discussed how the proposed solutions follow an almost identical script in every country. Digital aid, digital currency, digital control, and all of this in the name of protection and sustainability. But are these movements truly emergency responses, or are we witnessing the careful application of an old project? When we look back, we see that the current economic model isn't being replaced because of failure, but by design. A concentrated, silent, and well-coordinated will. Are we living through a real crisis, or a manufactured one designed to justify a new system? And in this shadow game, who's really pulling the strings? Back in 2016, a video published by the World Economic Forum featured a phrase that quickly became a meme, a critique, and a warning all at once. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. Many thought it was a provocation or an exaggeration. But time has shown that this phrase wasn't just rhetoric. It was the summary of a societal model already in the implementation phase. The core proposal of this new model is to replace the idea of ownership with that of access. Instead of owning a house, you rent. Instead of having a car, you use a ride-sharing service. Instead of storing your data, your photos, your documents, everything is kept in the cloud, controlled by platforms. This transition is presented as modern, ecological, and efficient. But when looked at more closely, it becomes clear that real control over these goods and information is being concentrated in very few hands. This narrative has gained traction especially in countries with public policies aligned with Agenda 2030. The argument is that individual ownership generates inequality, overconsumption, and environmental impact. So the proposed solution is a circular economy, where everything is shared and no one really owns anything. But is this proposal as neutral as it seems? And who determines who gets access to what? The system has already begun testing in major cities. Clothing, appliance, and even furniture rental models have been promoted by governments and NGOs as examples of responsible consumption. At the same time, digital platforms have expanded their dominance. Streaming instead of collections, software subscriptions instead of one-time purchases. Everything seems more practical, until the service is denied, cut off, or suspended due to a policy beyond your control. And here lies the critical point. When everything you use depends on a subscription, credit, or temporary access, your autonomy disappears. What once was yours can now be taken away with a click. A changed contract, a low environmental score, an automated decision, all of it can directly affect your ability to live independently. And who monitors these systems? What are the criteria? Little is said about this. The idea that ownership is unnecessary comes with another, that we must trust the systems. And that includes trusting multinational corporations, interconnected governments, and algorithms that measure your behavior. But history has shown time and again what happens when power becomes too concentrated. The problem now is that this power no longer just affects what you do, it directly affects what you can have. This vision is fully aligned with the philosophy of the World Economic Forum and the principles of Agenda 2030. The shift from owning to using is justified by a supposed pursuit of social and environmental balance. But in practice, it may be building a system where only a small group truly owns, while the rest only rent, access, depend. Does that sound like freedom or a new form of servitude? What's most concerning is that this change is being sold as inevitable. The idea that young people no longer want to buy homes or cars is repeated by all major media outlets. But is this shift truly spontaneous? Or has it been shaped by years of economic policies that have made it increasingly difficult for new generations to own anything? At the same time, there is a growing movement to limit the use of unsustainable resources. There are already proposals to restrict the size of homes, limit the number of goods per person, and even control types of food based on carbon footprint. The justification, once again, is to save the planet. But the rules always seem to apply more heavily to the general population, while elites maintain their untouched lifestyle. If private property ceases to be a real option, what's left for the individual besides permanent dependence on systems they don't control? And if all your possessions are digital or rented, what guarantees you'll still have access to them tomorrow? This new logic is being imposed step by step under a veneer of modernity. If someone had told you 10 years ago that you would be rated based on your behavior, consumption, lifestyle, and even opinions, and that this would determine your access to credit, services, and travel, it would have sounded like a dystopia. But this system already exists. It is operational in China, tested in entire cities, with thousands of data points cross-referenced by artificial intelligence. And now, little by little, this model is beginning to take shape in the West as well. Its name? Social credit system. The Chinese version is public. The government monitors everything: purchase history, behavior on social media, interactions with other citizens. Depending on your score, you may be rewarded with benefits or punished with restrictions. It may seem far from our reality, but the idea of using data to define merits and access is already being implemented through green, sustainable, or digital wellness programs in various parts of the world. What was once direct state control now takes a more disguised form. Today, platforms, banks, and even apps are beginning to measure your habits. Sustainable reward programs, for example, offer benefits to those with a lower carbon footprint. Sounds positive, but when those metrics begin to define who can travel, get a loan, or buy insurance, the picture changes completely and quickly. Digital wallets, which are being promoted as the future of the economy, are also part of this machinery. They store not only your money, but also your documents, vaccination history, tickets, and consumption data, all in one place, all under monitoring. The justification is efficiency. But who controls access to this data? And who decides what qualifies as acceptable behavior? This new system doesn't arrive as an authoritarian imposition. It comes as a convenience. It's easy to join. It's free. It's practical. But little by little, it shapes a new normal. A world where your actions are monitored and classified, where every click counts, every choice weighs. And this doesn't depend on a totalitarian government. All it takes is an algorithm program to filter out undesired behaviors. Major institutions are already testing similar models. Banks that monitor where and how you spend. Companies that hire based on your digital presence. Platforms that demonetize creators for content deemed sensitive. It all follows a single logic: to create a digital profile for each citizen and use that profile to determine their place in the system. But what if you don't want to participate? The answer is simple. You are gradually excluded. No access to credit, to digital services, to professional opportunities. Exclusion doesn't come by force. It comes through obsolescence. You're no longer fit for the system. It's the digitalization of an old method of control. Reward the compliant, silence the dissenters. This kind of structure relies on three pillars: data, connectivity, and adherence. The first two already exist. The third is the most dangerous and the most effective, because it relies on the idea that all of this is for the collective good. But is it really? How far can the common good go before it collides with individual freedom? The idea of a Western social credit system is still denied by many governments. But when you look at recent public policy guidelines, digital banking systems, environmental monitoring programs, and the terms of service of major platforms, everything seems to point in the same direction. The path isn't imposed, it's induced. When you realize that every choice is being recorded and evaluated, will there still be room for free will? Or are we entering a new society where being free simply means following invisible rules that no one ever voted on? Everything we've seen so far might seem like scattered pieces, but this is where they come together. Digitalization, economic crisis, the end of ownership, surveillance disguised as convenience. All of it forms part of the same project. And this project is no longer under construction. It's in the installation phase. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening now. Agenda 2030, the World Economic Forum, digital and environmental credit systems, new educational and social guidelines, they all follow a single logic: to create a new global operating model. A model where borders lose their relevance, where the individual exists within a system that defines what is right, acceptable, and allowed. And it all seems inevitable because no one is being forced. People are accepting it. That acceptance comes gradually. It comes with the promise of convenience. It arrives disguised as choice. The app that makes life easier, the platform that connects you, the credit that rewards correct behavior. None of this arrives with imposition. It arrives with a smile and a benefit. But what looks like freedom is just a new kind of leash. And with every use, every click, every bit of data surrendered, the system learns more about how to keep everyone inside it. The institutions promoting these changes today don't hide their intentions. They speak openly about the need for global governance, collaborative models, and a transition of values. It's no secret. It's in official documents, speeches at international forums, public interviews. The only reason it still sounds like conspiracy theory to so many people is because almost no one reads those documents. While the population lives in the present, worried about the next bill or the next crisis, the gears turn on a timeline of strategic planning. 5, 10, 20 years ahead. With every new emergency, a new layer of the system is activated. First it was the pandemic. Then the logistics collapse. Now the climate crisis. What comes next? And more importantly, is it already prepared? Every country that adapts its legislation, every city that becomes smart, every service that requires digital authentication contributes to the consolidation of this new structure. When everything is connected, control will be automatic. And at that point, questioning the system won't just be unpopular, it will be impossible. Because everyone will depend on it to live. And that's the most delicate point. No one will notice the exact moment when freedom disappeared. Because it won't be taken all at once. It will be replaced by something else. Something cleaner, faster, safer, and fully monitored. The new order won't knock on the door. It already has the digital key. The promise is that it's all for the collective good. But what happens when the collective good becomes a mandatory standard? When disagreement becomes a risk? When your entire life is recorded, ranked, conditioned? This revolution won't need war. It will be carried out through contracts, apps, and systems that help, until they stop helping. In this scenario, it no longer seems like an exaggeration to ask whether, when the world finally wakes up, it will already be fully programmed not to react. What seems like a series of isolated policies, well-intentioned goals, and modern solutions, in reality reveals a pattern. Agenda 2030 and its institutional arms, such as the World Economic Forum, central banks, and big tech, are building something much greater than a new model of sustainability. They are designing a new form of collective existence, where individual choices are replaced by global directives, and where freedom becomes a privilege conditioned on behavior. The promise of efficiency and social justice hides the fragility of a system that, in order to function, requires continuous and silent obedience. This story is just one piece, and one day you may see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.